we learned this three sources, three proofs that the final bracha of the benching must be rabbinic. And it's interesting because all of these three proofs, you could really ask questions on them. Like, for example, the first proof, we had to figure out how that fits with the rule that the rabbis have the right to uproot a law in the Torah. So in other words, the first proof, we had to sort of come up with an explanation how it really is a proof that the rabbis established, that the rabbis made the Tova Meitiv and not the Torah. Maybe the Torah made that Tova Meitiv and the rabbis exempted the workers. Couldn't say such a thing. It's possible to say such a thing. Then you have the second proof, and the second proof is also like a little complicated, and it goes through the rules. Let me mute everyone here. It goes through the rules of brachas, and we have all different types of brachas, and they start with baruch, they end with baruch, and there are exceptions to the rule. And then somehow we prove from that brisa that Teva Meitiv has to be rabbinic. It must be rabbinic. And what exactly the proof is, I must say it's not so simple, it's not so clear. The fact is the bracha hatoiva hameitiv doesn't really fit in the general rule, meaning the way it should be is that hatoiva hameitiv should start without baruch and it should end with baruch. And then it would fit with the other flow of the other brachas of benching. What do I mean? Well, a typical bracha hasmucha lechaverta, a typical bracha that continues from other brachas, the typical case is, look at the first bracha of benching. You have a bracha that starts with baruch, hazanas ha'olam, and it ends with baruch, hazanas ha'koil. You have that the beginning. That's the beginning bracha of benching. What's the next bracha of benching? Noideh lecha. The next bracha of benching starts with noideh lecha, not a bracha, but it ends with baruch. And the reason it starts without baruch and it ends with baruch on the second blessing of benching is because it's called a bracha hasmucha lechaverta. It continues. It's a continuation bracha. There's a bracha that we started with. Then this is a bracha that it continues with. And the bracha of a continuation bracha does not start with baruch. It ends with baruch. So it ends with al haaretz v'al hamazon. Then you have the third bracha of benching. It starts with not a bracha, v'al hakoil, and it ends with a bracha of the bracha of B'nei Berachim of Yerushalayim Amen. So you've got, I'm sorry, it starts with Rachem. I said the wrong thing. It starts with Rachem and it ends with B'nei Berachim of Yerushalayim Amen. So you have the third bracha, the same thing. It's a bracha hasmucha lechaber. It's a continuation bracha. It does not start with baruch. It ends with baruch. Now you have the fourth bracha of benching. And what happens in the fourth bracha of benching? The fourth bracha of benching, it starts with baruch and it doesn't end with baruch. So it ruins all the rules of brachas. So the Gemara says that it's a bracha bifnei atzma. And there is a discussion here in the commentaries if this part is part of the brisa itself, that maybe this is actually a continuation of the brisa. The brisa says it's a bracha b'fnei atzma, it's a bracha on its own, and you see from there that it's not biblical. So the thing is, let's say it's rabbinic. Even if it's rabbinic, so why doesn't it start without baruch and end with baruch? It's rabbinic. Okay, fine. It's rabbinic. It's a bracha on its own. The rabbis established it. Okay, fine. It's rabbinic. But still, let it start with the rules. Let it follow the rules. It's a continuation of the benching. In fact, Tosfos asked this question. He says, "So what's the story here? You want to say it's rabbinic? Okay, rabbinic, but it doesn't fit. I mean, like it's still let it start the way it should. Why is it starting with baruch and it's not ending with baruch? It's a continuation of the bracha, even if it's rabbinic." So the understanding is that which we're seeing in other examples as well, is that the bracha of benching went through stages. That just like the blessing on the Torah, we said went through stages. When you get called up to the Torah, it got changed. It went through different stages, and is that the only example, or do we have another example of other brachas that went through stages?
You're talking about the Tanoim that they made.
The other example, one second. The other example of brachas that went through stages are the morning brachas. They initially were said at different times when you put on your shoes, and when you straightened up, when you took a step, initially they were. So there are certain different stages that these brachas went through, and the bracha here, Hatov HaMeitiv, also went through a stage. What were the stages that the bracha of benching went through? That initially it was just a bracha thanking Hashem for, and we're going to soon see about this. What is the Hatov HaMeitiv bracha initially instituted because of? Hatov means Hashem is good, ve'meitiv, and he does good to others. And the initial reason why this bracha was instituted, it's for a sad thing that at least we were able to, it sort of worked out, but it was a very terrible, tragic and horrific happenings. It has to do with the destruction of the city of Beitar, when the city of the enemies the Romans destroyed the city of Beitar, and maybe about 65 years after the destruction of the second temple. And what happened was the Romans were so angry at the Jewish people because we kept their huge armies fighting us for years. They couldn't win us. They were so fed up with us that they didn't allow our dead to be buried. And for 15 years, the dead bodies were piled up. And so the blessing was instituted. Finally, Rabbi Gamliel, after giving his wealth to bribing the Romans to allow us to bury our dead, after 15 years, they finally let us bury our dead. And it was a great miracle that they did not decompose. So Hatov v'hameitiv is a bracha instituted that Hashem was so kind to us that the bodies were all intact after 15 years in the heat, in the hot sun. It was a tremendous miracle that they did not decompose, and that they allowed us to bury them. So we said Hatov, that he did good, that he didn't cause these bodies to smell and decompose, and v'hameitiv, and he did good that he allowed them to be buried. And that was the bracha, the initial institution of that bracha. Afterwards, it got attached, the rabbis attached it to the benching, and they added stuff to it. But the initial bracha was a short bracha. Hatov HaMeitiv. They said this bracha. They thanked Hashem for doing this great thing of allowing the dead to be buried and that they didn't decompose. And so this was the initial institution of this bracha. And that's why it starts with Baruch, because it's a short bracha. It's a typical short bracha that doesn't have the rules of it's supposed to start with a Baruch and end with a Baruch. It's a short bracha. It's just a one-liner. And then they added rules that you're supposed to say Melech 3 times and other things 3 times. So the bracha ended up having some changes and was instituted attached to the benching, but they didn't change, even though they attached it to the benching, they didn't change the format that it initially was started with, which is Baruch. And so that's the understanding now of the final bracha of benching. Yes, Simone.
So if the Hatov HaMeitiv came after the destruction of the second temple, then the first 3 brachas must have been hundreds of years earlier, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now the Talmud talks about all these things and discusses the Hatov HaMeitiv, if it's biblical or rabbinic. you have to understand the Talmud was 400 years later, 300 years after this. The Mishnah was after this. The Mishnah ended in the year 200, and the Talmud ended in the year 500. This is all well after it, and they already had these rules established of saying Hatoiv HaMeitiv, and the question was, where, was it biblical or was it rabbinic? But this would be the rabbinic source. This is the rabbinic assuming that it's rabbinic, this is the source of the bench of the final bracha. Yes, Emma.
One other question. So we've been trying to prove why it's not biblical, but why it's rabbinic. But how come we don't go the other way around? That why don't we look for a pasuk somewhere that would then prove it's biblical?
So, the rabbis are they sort of have their understanding of what it is, and they believe that it's rabbinic. They just want to find sources. In other words, if they thought that there's room that it's biblical, they would search for sources and try to find it that way. Or if they didn't know what it is, you're right, they would search for sources and try to find out. But it seems like they have a tradition. They have some type of a tradition or understanding that it's rabbinic, and now they've found some sources. But or maybe they are looking both ways and they just didn't find any biblical. So this is what they found. You know what I mean? It could be that they are looking both ways at this point, and they happen to find these rabbinic sources. Okay, so
Rabbi.
Yes, Dom.
As far as like evolving, I'm not sure if this evolved or not, but I read that in the last blessing, the one that's after Bonei Barachma B'Yishlayim Amen. So the next blessing starts Barachat Hashem Elkeinu Melchalam Avinu Malkeinu, and there used to be a view that at the end of that, where it ends right before the Harachmans start Al Yechasreinu, there used to be a view that there was an Amen over there.
Yeah, that is an interesting point that you're mentioning, right? That where does that bracha exactly end? And what is interesting is that the additional, we mentioned earlier about a harachaman for the Baal Habayis. Remember that? We said there's a special paragraph that the person who says the grace is supposed to say a special paragraph benching the Baal Habayis. And then we said, and Rebbe would add another sentence to it. And what you see from that Gemara is that there's number one, the idea, the option of adding that if you don't have guests, you don't add that bracha. Of course, you don't say that harachaman. And then even however it was instituted, there's the option of even adding more to it. That's what Rebbe did. Rebbe just added more to it. In other words, in his house, he would say another paragraph. So the commentaries say, you see from here that you could really add a prayer, to the bench. So the question is, where does the actual bracha end, and where does what was that itself is? There's something that was added after. The harachamans are not exactly part of the initial bracha. They're sort of like additions that you could add that of course it's customary to add them all, and some people even add extra ones. But that's a good point that we probably should look into. Why is that? Some people, the Ashkenazi custom is to answer Amen, I believe, after Al Yechasreinu. And but it seems that in other traditions they don't say Amen, and so the question would be why. And I think that's a good question. We'll have to look into that. In other words, does the bracha end earlier according to other opinions? Is it unclear where it ends, and therefore we don't say Amen? Is it meant to be said quietly, so therefore you don't say Amen? So these are things that we should probably look into. But anyway, there is a custom. I could take a look over here at the art school if they say anything. I know I have been in benching in Ashkenazic circles, and they do say Amen. What do they do in the Sephardic? Ezra, are you here? Is Ezra? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they say Amen? I can't hear you. You're muted.
To be very honest with you, I haven't benched with a Sephardic minion in a long time.
Okay.
It's here in the Schottenstein, I guess it is.
Yeah. Does it say something?
It says the leader may put down the cup of wine at this point. So
right.
Ending of some fashion. It does say Amen.
Right. So the arts, the interesting thing is in Lubavitch they put the cup down after Uvenei, a little earlier. So it could be go hand in hand. He says this is the end of the blessing. The listener should respond Amen here, unlike the other parts of Brochos Amos. And this one does not conclude with a brief blessing summing up the theme of the section as noted above. Central text of the blessing consists only 2 words, Hatova Meitiv, and it is therefore no different from the short blessing cited before performing a commandment or partaking of food. The addition to the text of considerable outpourings of gratitude does not alter the fact that the brief text does not call for a double blessing. Oh, so he brings it's sort of our discussion here that even though they added these other texts, but we don't put a bracha at the end. I guess that's the end of this. Yeah. Okay, they don't explain the other view, but we have to wait. There's a few more pages of the Gemara here, and I believe we might touch upon it more a little later. Okay, so
also Rabbi, you mentioned this rabbi that he would say a blessing for the harachman for the host, but if there's no host, he wouldn't say that harachman.
Well, the Gemara mentions that, and then the rabbi added a sentence to that extra harachman or Yehi Ratzon. It's a Yehi Ratzon, actually, yeah.
Right. So my question on that is, what we say harachman on our parents, even though our parents are not here.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if we're saying the harachman to bless the host, and if there's no host, you don't say that. We say a harachman to bless our parents, and if our parents are not alive, we still say that harachman. That's my question.
Well, imagine this: you want to give a blessing to one's parents in heaven. Okay, that's one thing, but compare that to you're in your house, and you say, "Oh, may Hashem bless the host of this house. He should be wealthy, and it's your house. He should have nachas. You're blessing yourself. I mean, that's a very different thing than blessing. You know what I mean? Having a blessing for one's parents. You know what I mean? Yeah. Oh, the host. He should have everything good. I mean, you just sound like you're, blessing yourself. I don't know if those blessings work.
I get it.
Okay. So the Gemara then. The Gemara then mentioned the third proof, and the third proof was that Beis Ha'avel, in a house of mourning, they skip this bracha. Now the question on this is, according to who? According to who do they skip the Hatoy V'Hametiv? According to which rabbi? There's the Tanakama, which means the first opinion, and there is the Rebbe Akiva, which is the second opinion. Tanakama is always a term used. Sometimes it doesn't say a name for in a Mishnah or Brisa, so we just call that author. We call him the Tanakama, the first author, and then you have the name. So the Mishnah, the Brisa. Here it's a Brisa. It says, what do they say in a Beis Ha'avel? The first opinion says Baruch Hatoy V'Hametiv. That's the Tanakama. And the second view is Rabbi Akiva says, Dai Baruch Dayan Ha'emes. And the Gemara, of course, is surprised that according to the first opinion, you don't say Dayan HaEmes. Dayan HaEmes is especially apropos for a Beis HaAvel, a house of mourning. They should say, "Blessed is the one who judges honestly." So the Gemara is surprised you don't say Dayan HaEmes according to the first opinion. So the Gemara answers, no, it means even Hatoiv HaMitiv. And Rabbi Akiva says just Dayan HaEmes. So which opinion holds you skip Hatoiv HaMitiv in a Beis HaAvel? Which opinion?
He just said the Tanakama, right?
Well, what does the Tanakama say? What are the words that he says? What are the words that the Tanakama says a person says in a Beis HaAvel? Mahei Moimrim. This is the 6th line of the Gemara on page 46b. It says Mahei Moimrim Beis HaAvel. So the first opinion starts right there. Baruch Hatoiv v'Hametiv. Blessed is Hatoiv v'Hametiv, which is that 4th bracha of benching. We call it the bracha of Hatoiv v'Hametiv. And even though it's a much longer bracha, that's the summarized wording way we can call it that. That's like the title of that bracha is Baruch Hatoiv v'Hametiv. So we're going to give it that name. It's called Hatoiv v'Hametiv. According to the Tanakama, you say Hatoiv v'Hametiv. The Gemara is surprised that you don't say Dayan HaEmes. The Gemara says, no, you also say Dayan HaEmes, but you say Dayan HaEmes, but you also say Hatoiv v'Hametiv. So according to the Tanakama, do you say Hatoiv v'Hametiv? Yes, you do say Hatoiv v'Hametiv. And Rabbi Akiva says Baruch Dayan HaEmes, and the Gemara seems to conclude that that's what Rabbi Akiva says, that you say that a person would say Dayan HaEmes, but he doesn't say Hatoiv v'Hametiv. So the Gemara is proving from that it must be that Hatoiv v'Hametiv is rabbinic, because you see it does not said in a Beis HaAvel. Now, what's the question? Question is, that's very nice. Rabbi Akiva says you don't say it in a Beis HaAvel. But what about the Tanakama? Tanakama says you do say it in a Beis HaAvel, right? So that would sound like maybe it's biblical. That would sound like maybe it's biblical, right? So each of these sources, there seems to, the Gemara's, and the reason is because we're delving deeply into them. You have to really work it out to see if it's really a proof, and you have to really, every proof could be disproven, and then you have to go dig deeper and make sure that it really proves it. And so the question that I'm asking is really mentioned by the Rashba, that one of the commentaries, mentions this question, and it seems like an obvious question. That how do you prove from here that Hatoiv v'Hametiv is rabbinic? Because Rabbi Akiva says you don't say it in Beis HaAvel. What about the Tanakama who says you do say it in Beis HaAvel? And especially because the understanding is that when Rabbi Akiva argues, it's not the halacha doesn't necessarily follow Rabbi Akiva. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. So if there's other people, it depends how many people are arguing against him. So if you say that the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva, that would be maybe a proof. But if the halacha doesn't follow, and it turns out that it doesn't seem to follow him, because the brought in Shulchan Aruch to say this long bracha, which includes both Hatoiv v'Hametiv and Dayan HaEmes. Now, even though we might not say it, but that has to do with maybe tradition or custom. But the halacha seems to follow the opinion against Rabbi Akiva. So according to that, it's said in a Beis HaAvel, Hatoiv v'Hametiv. You add to it maybe, but it's still said in a Beis HaAvel. So the question is, so what's the proof that it's rabbinic? Maybe it's biblical, especially because we have a Tanakama that seems to say that it is recited. Okay, so that's a little question and let you think about it. Ezra, do you have a question? I see the hand icon is there. Ezra? Oh. Do you have a question, Ezra? Your hand icon.
Yes. I just wanted to clarify the point that you'd asked about Tova Metiv, and the answer is yes, we do say Amen.
Amen.
And we normally say it, first of all, that entire part is rather different from what the Ashkenazim know.
Okay.
Okay, that's number one. Number two, they say it says Ya'anu Amen right at that point. Okay, and then this Rahmanu Ishtabach, and then they have a whole bunch more of Rahman that the Ashkenazim normally do not include. And at the end of all of those, there's Renoma Amen. Again, it's said there. And then after that, the Rahman that you have for Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, Sukkot, etc., just like what the Ashkenazim will normally say, but it's a rather different format than what, let's say, the Ashkenazim will normally say for the fourth bracha.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, shkoyach. Okay, good. All right. Well, we still have some.
Rabbi, can I ask what type of Sfard are you? What is the background you're speaking there?
My father's side is from Turkey. My mother's side, no, on my father's side, his father is from Turkey. His mother was from Syria, from Halab. And on my mother's side, Italian and Russian. So
on your mother's side, they're not Sephardi, are they?
Well,
are they
where
Italian?
they met in Egypt.
And then they had a Yetziat Mitzrayim.
The second time, 1958. But that was part of the second Geulah, if you want to call it that. But that was due to Israel being created in 1948. So.
Very nice. Yes, Ben.
I wonder, why do you say if the Tanna Kama said it, then it's probably the Oraita?
Well, I didn't say probably, but you can't prove to me it's rabbinic. If the proof is because you don't say it in a Beis Havel, it's not such a good proof. If the Tanna Kama says you do say it in a Beis Havel, where's the proof now? You get what I'm saying? I'm not saying it proves that it's D'oraisa, but definitely doesn't prove that it's rabbinic. You know,
it's unsettled.
It's unsettled. Yeah, don't give me a proof that it's rabbinic if the Tanna Kama says, and the proof is because you don't say it in a Beis Havel, and Tanna Kama says you do say it. You know what I mean? That's not. It seems hard to understand. So the answer to the question is that from the way they argue, it seems obvious that this is not the argument is not if it's rabbinic or biblical, because they pick this side. Well, this is what it seems to me is the answer. He doesn't explain it. Well, the Rajba just says that they're not arguing about biblical or rabbinic. That's his answer. Now, what that means, I think, is that from the way they argue, it seems that they're more arguing about custom or tradition rather than about biblical or rabbinic. From the way they're arguing about the actual wording of this bracha. If it's said in a Beis Havel or not, it doesn't seem like they're taking on such a major argument about rabbinic or biblical, because if they're talking about rabbinic or biblical, it would be applicable in many other examples, not just a Beis Havel. Because they're arguing this side case, this specialized case, a specific case, it seems that that's not the argument. And therefore, we assume that if the Tanna Kama holds that it's rabbinic, if Rabbi Akiva holds it's rabbinic, then the Tanna Kama would also hold it's rabbinic. He just says, even though it's rabbinic, you still say it in a Beis Havel. But if they were arguing about this major argument, if it's rabbinic or biblical, it would take on a much more, a much bigger type of example. They would use a much bigger example to show this difference between rabbinic or biblical. So it seems from the fact that Rabbi Akiva holds that it's rabbinic, that's a proof that it's rabbinic, because even the Tanna Kama is not arguing about if it's rabbinic or non-rabbinic. He's just arguing about the wording. And so therefore it is a proof, even though Rebbe Kiva is the one who spells it out. But the fact that the other one doesn't show that he's arguing on that point is a proof that seems like everyone agrees that it's rabbinic. So that's the answer to the question. Yes, Susan.
Have the customs of benching, the way the blessings are, changed in the last 200 years?
No. Okay, so the next Gemara is these last 4 lines before the 2 dots. So let me tell you where we're starting. It's maybe about 17 lines from the top. Lehechan hu chayzer. Now, lehechan hu chayzer literally means, where does he go back to? And we're talking about there are different opinions of what we're talking about here, but let's see Rashi's view. Rashi's learning this case is that someone joined a zimun because they ate together, and he's planning on eating more afterwards. So he had to stop his meal until they finish some parts of the zimun. To what extent is a discussion that we had earlier, and where does the zimun go to, and so he had to stop eating until they finished to that part. Now, Rav Shesha said you have to wait until you finish the whole first bracha. That's all part of the zimun, and then you could continue eating. Now, you're going to continue eating, and when you finish eating, where do you go back to? So you heard the first bracha of the benching, right? Now, on the one hand, you heard the first bracha of the benching. On the other hand, you did eat again. You ate more, and where would you, if you ate more, where are you going back to when you want to bench? Do you start from the beginning, or do you start from after the first bracha of Zon? Now, the Gemara says, Rav Zvid mishmei da Abaye amachiz alavish. So Rav Zvid, in the name of Abaye, Rav Zvid says in the name of Abaye, you have to go back to the beginning of the Brochos Hazon, because this is the story. You ate with 3 people. When you eat with 3 people, you now have a new bracha you need to recite. What is that new bracha? According to Rashi, you have to keep in mind that Rashi continues with his view from the previous page. Rashi on the previous page said that an individual only blesses 2 brachas that are biblical. He doesn't have to say the first bracha. The first bracha is only part of the zimun. And so according to Rashi, you start with noideh lecha, right? When you're an individual. The only thing is, here you started benching with, you ate a meal with 3 people. So your meal now obligates the first blessing of the benching. So the question is, was it good enough, maybe, the fact that when you participated in that first part of the zimun, does that help you for that first bracha, or do you now have to say the first bracha? of the Zimun. So that's the question of the Gemara. Where do you go back to? Rav Zvid in the name of Abai says you got to start from the beginning, because since you started the meal with 3, guess what? You now have to say all 3 brachas of the benching, because you ate a meal of that requires 3 brachas of the biblical brachas of benching. Rabbanan Amri, the rabbis say, you're just like a regular individual now. You finished your zimun, they left. You made the zimun with them, goodbye. And you go back to Lamachim Shapasak, to the place where you stopped, which means after the zimun ended. That's you start at the Noid Elacha, and you have a shorter benching. And the Gemara concludes and says, "V'hilchos Lamachim Shapasak," and the halacha would be that you would start in the place where you ended, which would be contrary to what people would think, which is that you would actually have a shorter grace after meal. You would just start the place where it ended, which means you would start with Noid Elacha. Now, of course, you don't start with Noid Elacha. You'd have to start with a Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu Melech Haolam, and then start Shein Chalta Lavisenu, and so on. Eretz Chemda Teva Chava. You would start with you'd have to start there with a bracha. Okay, so that's the way Rashi learns this Gemara. Again, we're continuing from Rashi's view that the bracha of the first bracha of benching doesn't apply when you're an individual. So the question of the Gemara is: so what happens if you started out as 3 people, but you ended your meal with 1 person, basically? In other words, you answered to their zimun, you continued eating. Now you're an individual. Are you really an individual? Or since you started with 3, are you required to say that first bracha? Now, this is very not practical, because we know that we always say all 3 brachas of benching, but this is the way Rashi learned, the way Rashi understands the Gemara, at least the way we think Rashi understands the Gemara. And Tosfos is very bothered with a big question on this. And that's his typical question, of course, is, we know all 3 brachas are biblical. How can you say that an individual is exempt? And, that was his general question that he's been asking throughout on Rashi. And here he brings Rashi. He says Rashi translates it that it's referring to a case where 1 person answered the zimun, and Tosfos asks, according to this, you're gonna start with Noid Elacha and you're gonna skip the first bracha. What about everything you ate afterwards? Tosfos is bothered. You ate stuff in between, in the interim. You finished the zimun, you ate food, you ate bread, and now what are you gonna do? Just Noid Elacha. What about that bread that you ate before the Noid Elacha? You weren't before the Brochos, you didn't say the first bracha. So therefore, Tosfos has another pshat, and his pshat has to do with what is the chazan, or the person leading the benching. What does he answer? And you either answer Nevarech she'achalnu mishaloi or Baruch she'achalnu mishaloi. And of course, we know you answer Baruch, but that's what's the Gemara's question. Do you answer Nevarech, let us bench, or Baruch, or you actually do the thanks? Baruch, let him be blessed. Let Hashem, who we ate from, let him be blessed. So it's a question of the wording of the final statement of the zimun. Again, the zimun is a sentence. You say the preface to the zimun is Rabbi Sai Mervel and Benchen, or Rabbi Tai Nevarech. And then afterwards, Yishem Hashem Baruch Me'Tev. That's the preface. Then you have the zimun is Bershus Moran Rabban Rabbi Sai Nevarech She'achalnu Mishaloi. So Nevarech She'achalnu Mishaloi is really the main part of the zimun, and then the answer to the zimun that everyone responds is Baruch She'achalnu Mishaloi Tevachinu. Now, what is the guy who led it? What does he respond? And that's what the Gemara is discussing. Does he go back to his first statement, Nevarech she'achalnu mishaloi, or does he respond what the community responds, Baruch she'achalnu mishaloi v'chayinu? So that's the Gemara's, that's the way he translates it. And then Tosfos brings another explanation that he brings from the Ram Me Ibra. He brings another explanation. Tosfos says that here, what we're dealing with, and I sort of touched upon this earlier, that we're dealing with a person who left. He left from the group, and you called him to answer the Zimun. So he's in the marketplace, and he's somewhere, can hear you, can see you. It was unclear if he can see you actually, but he can definitely hear you. And you scream out, Rabbi Sai, Mevelen Benshin, and he answers where he is. And meantime, he's, hanging around over there in the marketplace, and he comes back. So the question is, where does he bench from when he comes back? And the reason why this is a question is because assuming that the opinion before that you had to listen to the entire first paragraph of benching, right? Assuming that rule, according to one opinion, you have to listen to the first paragraph of the benching. Question is, so was he exempted with that paragraph? When he comes back, does he have to repeat that, or is he exempt? Now, why is this so different than Rashi's interpretation? Rashi learned he continued his meal, and now he's going to bench. In Tosfos learning, he left the meal somewhere else, and now he wants to bench. It sounds similar to Rashi, except there's a major difference. According to Rashi, he continued eating. And now you want to say he doesn't have to say the first bracha of benching. Tosfos says he can't say that. But what in Tosfos' case, he didn't continue eating. What he did was he left the meal, and now he came back, but he didn't eat anything in the interim. And therefore, it's not like he really needs that first bracha of benching to be recited again, because he was participating in that zimun. And so therefore there was room to say that he exempted himself with the first blessing of the benching because he listened to it when he was in the marketplace. And that's what the Gemara is discussing here, that since you listened to it in the marketplace, would that exempt you? Are you exempt from reciting that again? Now, what I will mention to you is the last words of Tosfos, if you want to look at it, is big question what Tosfos means. He says, "Sheharei loy siper beinatayim." You see that in the second Tosfos, the bottom, the last line of the second Tosfos. He says, "Sheharei loy siper beinatayim," which means he didn't speak in between. Now, if you want to take those words literally, it means that he's in the marketplace, but he made sure not to talk from when he heard the zimun until he comes back and does his benching. So there could be, Tosfos is saying that as long as you didn't talk, you might be able to rely, based on these two opinions in the Gemara, that, you might be able to rely on that first benching. You heard that first blessing, and now you go back and you didn't talk in between, you could bench. Now, the only thing is, some of the commentaries say, no, it can't mean you didn't talk. It should have been so'ad. So'ad means not siper, but so'ad. Siper means talk. So'ad means you didn't eat anything. You didn't eat anything in between. But of course you talk, you're in the marketplace. So even if you talk, there's room to say that you are able to rely on that first bracha, even though you talked in the middle, but you could still bench even though you talked in between that first bracha and the other brachas. So that's the two. Now, the problem, the reason why we have these issues is because when they printed the Gemaras, until they were printed, they were handwritten. And then they tried to print them. And then the printer sometimes tried to make his corrections. And that's where you have areas where the rabbis say it can't be this, because we know there were some corruption in when they printed, when they went to print, because the the printer always thought, oh, I'm going to do such a good thing. I'm going to fix these corrections. And he might have been right sometimes, but probably many times was not correct. And therefore, you have areas like here. I don't know if your Gemaras have it, but my Gemara has a letter on top of that word siper in the Taisvis, and it takes you to the side, and it says, look at the Marsha, that it should be, in the Magen Avram, it should be Sa'ad. So I don't know if all the Gemaras have it, but I have a later print of Gemara. So they tried to make that correction. They didn't erase it. They left both. This way you see what it was before and after. See, when the correctors and the printers did it, going back centuries back, they decided that they're doing it their way, and they left out whatever might have been written there, and ended up with areas where the rabbis sometimes say it must be a mistake and it has to be a printing error. Okay, we got some questions over here. I think David was first. David?
My question is, maybe you spoke about this before. If a person's if there's a zimun and two leave and the third one's still there, and then another two people come and they want him to join their zimun, and he's eating and two people leave and come and two people leave and come, can he keep on taking part in the zimun over and over and over again of the two people coming and going, the different people coming and going?
Right. So it has to do with a Gemara that we're going to learn, and it is in chapter 200 of Shulchan Aruch. And it happens to be, I have it opened over here. And it depends if they were there in the beginning with him or they weren't. If they ate with him and they just didn't listen to the first zimun, then that's a problem. You can't answer together unless there were 6 people. Then each one separates and becomes like a zimun for their each group is separate, and then possibly the first guy could even answer to the other group as well. Maybe I'm not 100% sure about that, but or if there were only 5 people, the two people didn't listen, and now they want to make their own zimun, and they didn't answer to the first zimun. The problem is you were there, you already fulfilled your zimun, you can't join together with that other 2 people. However, if 2 new people came, that would be another story. If 2 new people came, that would be another story, and you would be able to make a zimun with them, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just look over here. Yeah. Yes, I am correct. Yeah. Now, what about the other case? You have 2 people answered to one guy who benched. David, are you still there? If 2 people answered to one guy who benched, and afterwards, one guy came from the marketplace and started eating and finished the meal. They finished the meal with that one guy. So they answered to a zimun. The one guy benched, and they answered him. They were nice. They didn't have to, but they were nice, and they answered to this one guy who benched. That's the real question here. So you have 2 people are still sitting there eating. They answered to a zimun of one guy, and now he left, and now one new person came and ate together, and now it says they cannot do the grace with that one person because they already were mezamim. Right, that won't work. One person comes, but only if 2. But if 2 people came, then that one person can join the 2. Yeah, it's a little complicated. The laws of zimun, not so simple. Okay, so that I believe that answers David's question. Yes, Ezra.
Susan had it first.
Oh, Susan, okay.
Ezra, go ahead. Ezra, go ahead.
No, I thought that once you left the place, you lose that capability of davening. And so therefore you can't even answer, and you shouldn't. And so therefore, how can we then call him back unless the guy was, within a couple of feet of where they are, because he's already gotten up and left. Now, even if he's in earshot, he's already left the place where he was supposed to bench.
So the rule about leaving the place, there are certain exemptions if you leave people there in the meal, about changing the place. But that it doesn't necessarily mean you can't bench. It just means you're not supposed to leave. Initially you shouldn't leave the meal until you bench. But the case that he did, we learned this Gemara before, that he doesn't even have to return to answer the Zimun. He could even stay in the marketplace and answer the Zimun. So it's not as simple as you're saying it, like he loses his opportunity. But there are issues here with your question. If you take your question a little further and put it on, ask your question on Tosfos, that's where you could have an issue here. And that is that Tosfos mentions this case where you're going to come back and rely on the benching that you heard while you were standing in the marketplace and say, well, I already said the first bracha of benching. Let me just start from the second bracha now. And that's the way Tosfos understood our Gemara. Now you're asking, how does that work? Are you allowed to bench? Can you rely on benching, the benching that you heard in the marketplace, and then move your place and then continue your benching as if it's a continuation? And that is an issue. And I believe the commentaries are a little bothered with that. I think I saw a Rajba that was not satisfied with this interpretation, if I'm not mistaken. So that's really the question here on Tosfos's explanation is, does that work? Does that is that and that's the way the Gemara seems to conclude. Like you could even rely on that. The Lamakam Shapasak, you would actually be able to conclude. So let me just pull it up here in the Rajba and just make sure that that this is what that I saw it here.
Yeah.
So he says over here, the Go'enim Paskin, he says, it's surprising that this one would make one bracha, go to his work, in return to the place of his bracha, he starts from the place of the second bracha that he stopped at. So the Rajba is talking about a case where right, that this is his question, that he went to his work, he went off, and he wants to go back to the place. So he says it's surprising, would be surprising such a thing. Now, it could be he's surprised that the psak halacha would follow that, and therefore he follows he says the go'enim paskin like Rav Nachman, not like Rav Sheshas. And according to that, it's just a question on Rav Sheshas, but not on a question on what we do. it ends up being that it's an opinion that's not the accepted view. So the Rashba does ask this question. So that your question is a good question. It seems to be the question of the Rashba. Okay, yes, Ben.
I think they didn't say that he left the place where he was at. He left the place where he was at on the blessing, maybe. Not that he went out of the room and came back.
No. The Gemara before was talking about a case where he went to the marketplace. He answered while he was there, at least according to most opinions. That was the explanation. He answered what? And then he came back.
It's still about coming back from the marketplace.
Yeah. And then he comes back. Yeah.
Okay.
But my point is that he changed his location.
Yeah.
And because he changed his location, somehow, there was a discussion about, brachot, what happens if you eat something and you leave the place without making a bracha, then you're basically changing your location and you lose
the ability to eat more. But it doesn't mean you can't bench afterwards. You would need a new bracha on more if you wanted to eat more. But it doesn't mean you lose the bracha. But it is complicated.
Rabbi, you didn't finish doing what you're supposed to do.
What does that mean?
You didn't complete your blessings.
At the place where you ate.
Yes, at the place.
Okay.
Even if it's in the market.
The guy left. What do you want him to do? He left to the marketplace. What do you want him to do now?
Well, that was the point.
The guy is going to go back and bench. What do you want him to do? What are your options?
First of all, I think it's very disrespectful to start something, then go off and leave. I don't like that.
Okay, well, you'll have to take it out with him.
I know. I understand. I'm making. It's just to me. You don't do something like that. I wouldn't.
But that's
unless there was an emergency.
It was in a rut. I don't know. Whatever. He had some friend. I don't know. He wanted to speak to. I don't know.
He forgot. He left.
You weren't there, so he didn't. Okay. Yes. Who else had a question? Simone, did you have a question?
Isn't there an idea of if you have it in mind to finish eating somewhere else, you don't have to bench where you are. You can bench where you want to.
Yeah, that has to do with at the time you start the meal. You plan on continuing the meal somewhere else. And I believe they are supposed to have either a tzorech, there has to be like a need for such a thing, like a tzorech mitzvah, there's some mitzvah involved or something like that. I think it's brought down regarding Purim. Sometimes people would start a meal one place and continue it somewhere else. Like it's, so it should be some type of a tzorech maybe. And a tzorech mitzvah would be one example, but at least there should be some need. Maybe here there was a need, I don't know. I'm just saying, but we're talking about after the fact. So sometimes it doesn't matter if it's correct, if it's right or wrong, but what do you do now? We're dealing with after the fact, and it's that's a good question. Kasha, they call it a kasha for Maisa. The question of what we should have done. It's too late. We have to know what to do now. So that's really what we're dealing with. Okay, so that's the end of the Gemara here. The Gemara says v'hilchas elamakim shapasa. Okay, let's start the next little piece. Amar Reish Galusa, Amalei Reish Galusa. We're about 20 lines down from the top. So the Reish Galusa, the head of the head of
Exilarch.
What would you say? Exilarch. Okay, thank you. The Exilarch told Rav Sheshas, Amalei Reish Galusa, the Rav Sheshas, Aval Gav Drabanan Kashishe Aton. Even though you are elder rabbis and scholars, and you know proper etiquette. The Parsoim, Persians, in the etiquette of meals, they are even more careful than you. They are more experts. They're more experts. What was their custom? Bisman shehein shtei mitos, when there are two beds, and that's the way they used to eat their meals, was on beds. Each one would, they would lie, they would recline somehow on some type of a bed. So it says the Gadol Mesav Barosh, the greater one, the more important one, distinguished one would recline first, and Visheni loy, and the second to best, the second to highest ranking person would Lamaila Hemen, would recline above the first one. In other words, near his head. Bizman Shehin Shalosh, when there were three people, so Gadol Mesav Be'emtza, the greatest one would be in the middle, and Sheni Loi, the second to greatest, Lamaila Heimenu, would be above the first one, in other words, by his head, and Shlishi Loi, Lamata Heimenu, and the third one would be below, in other words, near the important person's feet. And Rav Sheshas now asks a question, Amar Lei, so Rav Sheshas said that if the important one wants to speak to the second of importance, metaretz terutze v'yosef, he has to straighten himself out in order umishtoi ba'adei, and speak to him. In other words, imagine someone, you're reclining, and then someone's by your head. You have to you wouldn't be able to turn your head to see the guy. You'd have to sit up or something. You have to straighten up, and it doesn't seem right. So Amar Lei Shani Parsai Machve Lei B'machuk. The Persians are different because they know how to, they speak with their sign language, with their fingers and the different movements of their arms. And therefore, the greater one, when he wants something, he wants to tell him something, he gives him hints. And so that's the little piece of Gemara. My time is up. We'll continue. We'll talk a little about it more tomorrow. Sei gesund. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Everybody.